Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to get the most out of your smartphone video footage. Of course, it all starts with how you shoot, so we'll talk about some tips there, but I know that this is more of a post-production video, so we're going to talk about some techniques on what you need to be paying attention to and what you want to be adjusting to get the most out of the footage and have it match up to DSLR, mirrorless, or even cinema camera footage. So let's start with this shot. On my recent trip to Cuba, here's in Pearson International Airport in Toronto, I just shot out the window a little bit of B-roll footage that I wanted to use, and these conditions were ideal for a smartphone. When you have a lot of cloud coverage, but you still have a lot of light because it's daytime, this is when you're going to get the most out of your smartphone footage. Of course, this isn't always what we want to photograph, but the reason that this is ideal is because it gives you a perceived sense of better dynamic range, because we don't have super high highlights and we don't have a lot of dark shadows anywhere. So it kind of evens out the image, much in the way that a DSLR or say a cinema camera would do for you automatically, in just the way that it naturally has a higher dynamic range. And needless to say, at first glance, when you look at a shot like this, it's kind of hard to tell what it was really shot on, because there's nothing pushing the limits of the medium here, which is great. So one of the things I did here is I shot this in 60 frames per second. I really don't like the look of 60 frames per second as a final delivered video. But my reason for doing that is because I thought I could conform it to either 24 frames per second, regular speed, or even in slow motion. So that would be the first thing I would normally do in my edit timeline. I would take this piece of footage, I would right click and go to clip attributes. And this one says it's basically 60 frames per second. I would conform it here to 23,976. Now, unfortunately, that kind of shifts down what I had selected as what I wanted my clip to be, the start and stop points. So what I do is I just use this little slide control here and find the most stable little piece of the shot that I wanted. Okay, that seems to be it. Now, the next thing I would do is, this was just handheld, because like most of us walking around with our cell phone, we just, even if we want kind of a stable shot, we're still pulling the cell phone out of our pocket and just pointing at whatever, trying to hold it as steady as possible. But what's great is that we can always add a little bit of stabilization in post. So I'm doing that right here. I switch from window to stabilizer. If I say camera lock, that's like as if it's on a tripod, and then I do the stabilize. As you saw, it punched in a tiny bit, but it's really not too bad. And then now when I play back, and it is in slow motion, but you do see this plane is moving, so it is video here. And it looks like we're on a locked off tripod shot here. So next thing I would do is I like to add a little bit of a LUT. What I mean by a little bit of a LUT is you apply a LUT, but LUTs generally push the limits of, like, just crush colors or really change the natural look of the image. And I don't want it to do that much. I just want to punch it up a little bit in a natural way. So first thing I do is I'll add a new node here because I like to leave this first node for overall exposure adjustments. And the second node here, I will apply my LUT. And I'm just going to apply one of these free LUTs. You can download on the internet. See, now it's pretty drastic. It's super contrasty. The darks are way too dark, I believe. So first thing I do, like I said, I apply a little bit of a LUT. So I go into this key, and rather than giving the full gain, I'm going to cut that in half, so 0.5. See, now I'm going to toggle on and off by using Command D on my keyboard. See, it just punches it up that little bit. It's still, if we look at the scopes down here, this was the natural image, which I kind of like where it sat in the shadows there. But when I apply the LUT, it pushes it down quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is go into the first node, and I'm going to bring that up again to match a little more the original. Okay, so now I'm going to disable both these nodes just for a second to see what we started with. And that was what we started with, and here's what we have now. It just looks like a little bit of a brighter image. Now, I still like to be a sense of depth rather than everything being on the same level, like the highlights and in the middle here, and there should be a little more of a range as far as going from light to dark. So I bring down the gamma a little bit. As you see, it affects the lift as well, so there's always a little bit of a push and pull for that. So now I'm going to disable all of them. I keep doing that, so I use Option D for that and bring them back. Right, now if you also, so as far as what we need to pay attention to, if you look at the reds, well, it's on now. I'm going to turn it off. Pay attention to these reds here. It's just slight, and also the yellows are off, on, off, on. And in this area here, you'll see that it creates just a little more depth on the building. There it looks a little flat with it turned off, and I'll turn it back on. It just creates a little more richness in there. And that's pretty much all we want to do. We don't want to push the image to being something completely different than what we originally shot. And that's kind of the trick to a shot like that. So let's move on to the next clip. In here, I'm pointing directly at the sun, but I really wanted this silhouette-y type, which is a little contrasty, but I mean, you want this sun to blow out, of course, but around here, it's not blowing out. It actually, it came across quite well. And as you can see, I framed it using the rule of thirds. And that's already been slowed down into slow motion. Okay. And what we'll do is, let's start with the same thing. So let me go back to this. I'm going to hit View, Stills, grab Still, and that will give us a bit of a template that we can apply as a starting point for here. So let's drag and drop that onto here. Okay, and of course, by default, it doesn't actually look as good as the original. But that's okay. We just want to start at that. I'm going to reduce my lift again because I still wanted that very silhouette-y type thing. And I'm paying attention to my shadows down here. And I always want it to be kind of that one notch up. You don't want it to be completely crushed like this, because then it really looks too contrasty, which is usually an issue with the cell phone footage. And then if we see our highlights here, of course something's going to blow out because we have the sun in the shot, and that's okay. But we want to roll that off softly, so we'll go to the high soft, and we'll just pull that down just a little bit. I'll toggle that on and off. Makes it a little more dramatic. I don't know, both kind of look good here because sometimes you get lucky with smartphone footage and it just turns out okay. But I'm going to show you one other little trick here. I don't know if we're going to see much of that effect, but let me add another node at the end. And down here, I'm going to go to luminance versus saturation and create a little point here. And I'm going to bring this down. So what that does is the areas that are supposed to be true black will be pure black. There'll be no color information in them. And then as it gets up to things that are a little more visible, it'll start to introduce color. And what that does is it adds a little bit of a almost contrast feel in regards to color, but the actual exposure is the same. Okay, so let's toggle that on and off. And we'll do the same thing with the highlights. So when we go to whatever is pure white here, it should remove all the color information. I just like to make sure there's a bit of a curve there, so sometimes you have to play with this. And we can use that for B-roll or to put a title over this or something like that, and it was captured with a cell phone. So turn off, on, off, on. And I think we can go back to this first node and we'll actually maybe bring somewhere in the mid-range up a little bit. Let that sun glow a little more. Now one thing, again, I like to point out what I'm paying attention to, and then if you like how I color grade, then you know at least what I'm paying attention to adjust. Because when you don't know what you're paying attention to, you pay attention to one part of the image, you think you got it mastered, and then when you kind of give your head a shake and look at it again, you realize, oh my God, what did I just do to the rest of the image? I messed it up. So one of the things I'm looking at here right now that I'm preferring with the original, when I turn this off, is kind of there's a bit of a golden hue coming through the whole image that we lose when we've applied our LUT and our adjustments. So we can reintroduce that with another node. I'll maybe just put it after the LUT. And just using the offset wheel, I'm just going to introduce a little warmth. There we go. All right, so now I'll turn it all off and turn them all back on. So then we still get a nice glow. It's a slightly different vibe because the color in all of these dark areas is cleaned up quite a bit. And the other thing is that really helps translate when you're putting videos on YouTube and they get compressed all to hell. The more cleaned up your color information is, the better it translates without blocking up on you. I mean, compression artifacts aren't directly due to that, but I find that it actually helps a little bit when you clean up your image and you pay attention to those things, get rid of color information in your blacks, because it's your dark black areas that really block up a lot, and they'll show little color hues. Even if it is blocked up because of compression, it's not as noticeable when there's not color information down in those deep dark shadow areas. So anyway, let's move on to the next shot here. So here I have a few vintage cars driving through Veradero City. So it's fine, you know, the footage is fine, not a lot of depth. I'm going to talk about we'll do the same thing here, we'll do the same couple of steps, but I'm going to also show you a new step on how to smooth out the image a little more and give it that DSLR or even cinema camera feel to it, at least to my eyes. Okay, so same thing, we'll add another node after here and we'll add our LUT. We'll just continue on with the same LUT. And see, that's way drastic. We don't want that. So we'll go to the key, cut that in half, 0.5. Our color temperature looks a little off on this. It looks a little blue if we notice our shadows. It's a lot of blue in there. I mean, the LUT does that a little bit anyway, but we'll come back over here and we'll go to temperature and let's warm that up a bit by sliding it to the right, or you can dial in a number if you like. Don't copy my numbers, your footage will be different. Again, what I'm paying attention to here is I always look at my whites when I'm adjusting white balance, but I also look at things that are predominant colors like this in this particular shot, this yellow, and then also the shadows. So it's like kind of a 3-point thing that I keep checking as I'm dialing in the temperature. And it's fine that it's not accurate white balance. Sometimes cinema looks have a little blue tinge to them. Sometimes they have a little yellow tinge to them. That's kind of normal. It's very rarely spot on to white. I mean, it might be a good starting point for a color grade, but since our colors are baked in from the phone, we're already dealing with something that's imperfect. We just want to get it to the look that we want. And I'm feeling that. Let me turn all the nodes off here for a second to have a look. This is what we started with, and this is where we're at now. So what I'm paying attention to now is how crushed our shadows are, which I don't want. I like the original for the shadows. I don't like the color as much, but I do like the original for the shadows. So let's it's usually a combination of lift and shadow. Lift brings up a lot more information. Shadow really it's almost like it starts directly at the blacks and doesn't go too far beyond the blacks and just lifts those alone. So I'm going to I always start with lift to see if that's going to do it for us. I feel like that's pretty good. Just see if there's any blacks that are too much. And the risk of pushing your shadow too much is you can get this kind of fade look, which sometimes that's the look you're looking for, and that's how you would get that. But I don't want that. I still want it to look fairly natural. So I'll just bring it up a couple of notches. My numbers here, I've gone to like a 3. Let me turn everything off again, see where I'm at. So the last thing I'm going to look at is see my highlights up here and the top of the car, but mainly up in the clouds. I'll turn them all off here for a second. See, I do have information there, and when I apply my grade, and this is mostly because of LUT, it usually pushes contrast, I've lost some stuff in my highlights. So I want to try to bring that back. And I'm going to do that after the node, because I know that it's mostly the LUT that's applying that. Actually, I can try a little bit before. It also works. And I also pay attention to the scopes when I'm doing that. Between gain and, actually gain feels a little more natural. When I'm applying the highlight here, I'm not only looking at the clouds. Well, the clouds are my key, and that seems to be about the sweet spot. If you dial them back too much, it looks dead after a while. So you want them to cut through. You want the peaks of those clouds to cut through, but not completely blow out and lose shape. So that seems about right to me. Just save that quick. And let's turn off all the nodes for a second. Turn them back on. Okay, so the other thing I want to do is at the LUT stage, I want to actually increase my saturation a little bit. And we're at, default is at 50. I'm going to pump it up 10 full points here, and let's see what that does. It actually looks a little better to me like that. I think it can handle 60. Sometimes if it's oversaturated, it looks something like that. And that at first glance you go, oh wow, that looks great, but it becomes too much and you start losing detail. But let's go somewhere in between. That's still too much. Let's say 65. I think that looks pretty good. So one of the other things I want to talk about that I like to do, and I'll do that in the first node, as promised, the midtone detail it's kind of a holy grail of cleaning up an image, in my opinion, because especially with 4K footage, because it looks over sharp and too crispy, and the highlights they cut through too much. The information, especially in someone's face, when you're looking at their face, you see every pore and every detail, and you just want to kind of clean up those midtones and give it a little bit more of a softness, a little more, to me it has kind of a filmic feel. It also has like a lot of TV shows on, say, like the CW and those type of popular mainstream TV shows usually have a little bit of a softening like that. There are filters that you can put on your camera that do those sorts of things, but also I found the midtone detail does a great job. So if you just go to a negative number, say I'll put like a negative 25 on this one, for example. Now, I hope you can see on the YouTube video what it does. Probably not so much here directly, but let me here. I'm gonna toggle this off. Well, I'm toggling the whole thing off. Let me exaggerate this. I'm gonna go minus 50. Now I'm gonna just switch this to 0. And then when I hit enter here, I haven't hit enter yet, and it's going to go to 0, but I want you to pay attention to the scopes over here and see what it does when I turn it off. 1, 2, 3, off. See what it did there? It's affecting the image quite a bit. I'm going to do it one more time. I'm going to go negative 50 and look at those scopes. I'm going to hit enter. See that? So it's actually doing a lot to the image there. And it kind of, I feel that it pulls the colors together, makes them seem a little more smooth. It's almost a bit of a noise reduction feel to it. It's not noise reduction, but in a sense it almost is, because you're getting rid of details in the midtone. Anyway, I still feel like I would split the difference here, probably go minus 25, just to be safe. I don't like to overdo it. So now let's see where we're at. Turn them all off, turn them all back on. A little warmer of an image. And let's do that last stage as well with the luminance versus saturation, and to clean up those blacks. and our highlights as well. And not too much, because we have if you have a lot of highlights in there, you don't want to take too much color information out of there if the image is mostly like super bright like that, because you're going to notice things are going to look unnaturally cut off color-wise to white. So this feels a little bit better. I'm going to just toggle on and off that last node to see what we applied here. That's off, that's on. If you notice the front of this car, that's with it on. See how dark it is? And then I'm going to turn it off now. See, it's filled in because those blacks have a lot of blue information in it because the car is blue. So if I turn that off, or sorry, if I turn that back on now, watch how it removes the color from those blacks. And it just has a bit more of a cinematic feel to it that way, I find. It's still very video-y like when you get up close because the highlights, and that's from the cell phone footage. So let's see if we can do a little something with that. I'll probably do it here. I'm on the first node and I'm going to use the curves because I find you get a lot more control here. See, so I'm pulling down those highlights. See the way they blow out there? That's really cell phone like over here. But if I pull them back a little bit, we start to get a little more control over that part of the image. Again, I'll keep an eye on the clouds so I don't lose them. Even bring it back a little bit. And I'm picking a point between these 2 points. And I'm noticing in here what it's doing. And I'm fine with that going a little darker. Just very small adjustments. So you push that, and my clouds just totally blow out, so I'm going to pull them down a little bit. And I'm feeling a little bit better about that. Let me toggle all of them off. That's what we started with, and that's where we are now. Off, on. Anyway, this video is getting a little long, so I think I'm going to cut that one off here, and we'll get back to you with a part 2 on how to get the most out of your smartphone footage. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Post your comments below. Send me links to your footage. I'd love to take a look and see what you're doing. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next video. And thank you so much for watching.